Week 3 of the Phil Steele Show. We're back. Kyle Schassburger, Tripp Hurd, and of course the man myth, the legend himself, the unicorn, author of college football's most comprehensive preview magazine. It is Phil Steele. You can follow him on X at Phil Steele 042. I'm at Kyle Schass at Tripp Hurd. Phil, you were asking me before we even hit record here, and before we size up this Week 3 slate, how was the evening at the Tripp Hurd household for Florida State's domination of LSU? Well, you know what? My guy, he rescinded the offer. He's got a sick kid at home. For those of you that are watching in the archive version on the Varsity channel on YouTube, and we hope you are after, for all you audio OGs, thank you very much, CSN, College Sports Now. But Tripp Hurd is at home. He's dealing with a sick child, so unfortunately I was not able to break bread with the lock doctor this past Sunday, and I'm kind of glad I didn't because FSU completely owned the Tigers.
Well, in the second half. First half, you would have been floating pretty good because LSU was up 17-14 and blew 2 opportunities inside the red zone. So I thought LSU controlled the first half, and then Florida State, after about midway through the third quarter, after that, they took control of the game.
Yeah, typical, Brian Kelly. And as a Notre Dame LSU fan, which, yes, it's possible, as an Irish Catholic growing up in Chicago and choosing ND, once you see Rudy, it changes your life, although that's only accurate for maybe half the Chicagoland because people love to hate the Fighting Irish anyways. But as a guy that lived in Baton Rouge for a couple of years, my daughter was born down there. I'm kind of an LSU transplant. That's my second team. But it was kind of fun to see the social media reaction to big game Brian Kelly kind of falling on his face in a moment that Notre Dame fans certainly got a chuckle out of. Tripp, I know you chuckled your whole way throughout the second half. FSU looks like the cream of the crop in the ACC, especially after I witnessed Clemson, Phil, on Monday night. I was a part of that historic field storming, as I alluded to before we left you on week 2. I did not crawl down onto the field, though. I'm in my 30s. I think maybe I'm a little bit better than that, not to cast any judgment. Those that are not a part of the student section that are trampling the field. But, Phil, I tell you, the salty Clemson fans exiting Wallace Wade Stadium with still 2 minutes to go in that game, and even midway through the fourth quarter, it was a sight to behold. Certainly nobody wearing orange had expected that to happen on Monday night. That was my lock of the week. Certainly got me the win in column. You were 2-1 in your power plays, calling Wyoming and Miami over Miami, Ohio last week. So good week for both of us.
Yeah, and the Clemson game, a tale of missed opportunities for Clemson. 3 times first and goal and 0 points out of it. One of them turned into a turnover that set up a Duke touchdown. I thought the 3rd and 3 play where they had sacked, it looked like they sacked Riley Leonard, got away and ran for a touchdown. I thought that was probably the key play of the game.
Tripp, what do you can contribute to the program here today? Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready to roll. I mean, the Florida State game was obviously, sloppy start for both teams, but it was great to see 31 straight go on the board for my side in that one. And I think it might work out better if you come over for a Bears game, Shass, because, we can both pull for the same guys at that point. I don't know how well it's going to work out when we're butting heads against each other.
Well, Phil, this is the start of a 17-0 regular season Super Bowl year for the Chicago Bears. So Tripp and I are extremely excited. We get the Packers and Aaron Rodgers Packers right off the bat. But I'm sporting my Duke hat today. If you haven't gotten your Phil Steele magazine, please make sure you do so. Still early in the season. Spend the money. Go online, philsteele.com. Follow him on Twitter, too, for all the YouTube tutorials inside the press box. And, of course, Phil Steele Plus. More information on that. One of our lucky listeners, viewers, continue to interact with us. Leave a review on the College Sports Now podcast feed. We'll select some random listeners and those who interact with us for a free membership valued at $99. All the team pages, all the breakdowns, years and years of records. Instant analysis. Be more like Phil. Again, bet smarter, not harder. All right, Phil, let's go ahead and get after it. Thursday night, there are a couple of games to mention. I'm not interested in either of them. I'm not sure you are either, but just to sprinkle those in, Murray State and Louisville, 7:30 on ACC Network. Also, Indiana State at Indiana. That's a Friday game, 7 o'clock on the Big Ten Network. We want to pay attention to, though, Phil, Illinois at Kansas. So, Jayhawks are a 3-point favorite. 58 is the total, 7:30 on ESPN2. Jalen Daniels didn't play last week, dealing with back tightness. It looks like he's going to give it a go against the Fighting Illini here. A Kansas team that was the darling early on a year ago, started 5-0. Finished the season 1-7. And for Illinois, it was a strong year for Brett Bielema and the Fighting Illini. However, they escaped by the hair on their chinny chin last week, coming from behind, trailing at halftime to Toledo and needing a last-second field goal to beat the Rockets in Champaign. So what are your prognostications for the Jayhawks and Fighting Illini in Lawrence Friday night?
I think it's going to be a great game. I mean, it's, to my mind, it's a pure toss-up. So I'm leaning with taking the points in it with Illinois. That Toledo team that Illinois struggled with last week, I thought if Toledo beat Illinois, they might have a shot at 12-0 this year. They're that good. So don't read too much into that. It's a very good Toledo squad. And Kansas, I do expect Jalen Daniels back this week. It looks like he practiced, which is big. He missed last week. But Kansas has one of the best backup quarterbacks in the game in Jason Bean. He did well last year when called upon and already has a 2-0 ratio this year. I look at the fact that Kansas last year finished off the year 1-7. This is an Illinois team that blew some opportunities. I think it's a pure toss-up, so I'm leaning with taking the points.
And I think another, advantage for Illinois in this game, they've already been in a tight game. I mean, that might work to their favor coming up here in what's projected to be another close game, whereas Kansas, they handled their business last week in the fourth quarter. But jump into the next game, Vanderbilt at Wake Forest. We've got an 11 o'clock kick time in Winston-Salem this weekend. And it looks like the Demon Deacons trying to beat Vandy for the second consecutive season here. Wake Forest got off to a start, 37-17 win over Elon. Vanderbilt comes in 2-0 on the year. They played both week 0 and week 1, wins over Hawaii. And they look good in the second half against Alabama A&M. 10 does seem like a lot to cover for me in this game, but I think with two defenses that look pretty stingy so far, maybe under could be in play here too. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I think under would be worth a look in this one. I do like Vanderbilt plus the 10 as long as you're getting double digits. The numbers come down. I like 10.5, 11 earlier in the week, but the number has come down. Remember last year when these two played, Wake Forest was the first game back for Sam Hartman. Hartman had a big game. Well, Hartman's not around anymore, which points to your under their trip. And Mitch Griff's is okay. Did okay last week. Threw for 329 yards, but it's a little bit different of an offense. Vandy's been scrappy. You got Clark Lee as a guy who's 8-3 as an underdog with 3 outright upsets. So I definitely lean with the underdog Vanderbilt in this one.
Phil, continuing on Saturday, Notre Dame, Fighting Irish, now up a couple of spots to 10th nationally in their first true test after blowout wins over Navy in Dublin, Tennessee State for the home opener in South Bend this past week. Sam Hartman playing NC State again. He's got a lot of experience now returning to Raleigh. He's played them 3 times before. He's lost 2 of those games. He only has 1 less touchdown pass than he has incompletion, 6 TDs to 7 incompletions. He's been flawless through 6 halves of football. The Irish are favored by a touchdown. 51 is the total. It's a 12 o'clock game on ESPN. Phil, tell me about my Irish. They got a chance covering the number against a notoriously stingy defense, especially up front for the Wolfpack, but a team that struggled a little bit on the road and eking out a win at UConn a week ago.
Yeah, I think it's a dangerous game for Notre Dame. NC State's always tough as a home dog, but I like the Irish to win this one by more than the 7.5 this week for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Irish are my number 1 surprise team right now. They're a non-top 10 team that I think could contend for a playoff spot. And as you mentioned, Sam Hartman's been the key difference. They've got the defense, they've got the special teams, and they've got the run game with Estime and Love and Payne all in the backfield. And then the other thing is Notre Dame just dominates these ACC games. They have now covered 9 in a row. And one of my favorite axioms is to play on a streak. You can win many times and you lose only once. I've been on the Irish many times on this streak against ACC teams. And as mentioned, they've won 9 in a row against the spread. I say they make it 10 in a row. I also like the fact it's a noon game. The crowd's not going to have that time to get juiced up for that nighttime game. And so I like Notre Dame minus the 7.5 in that one.
NC State has won 16 of 17 home games going back to 2020. But yeah, that ACC streak, 28 straight wins overall inside the league. The last time these two played, the Irish's only trip to Carter Finley Stadium was back in 2016. They played in those remnants of Hurricane Matthew. It was a straight slug of a game. Again, that's noon on ABC.
Another home dog this week in Waco. We've got number 12 Utah on the road taking on Baylor. The Utes come in -8.5. The total sitting at 47 right now. Now, one thing I noticed, the line opened at 5.5. So it looks like people are jumping on Utah, and they're coming off the big win over Florida that everybody had their eyes on in their opener. But Baylor lost to Texas State last week, 42-31. They gave up a ton of yardage too. And I mean, a Dave Aranda coach defense losing to a 4-touchdown dog in Texas State. I just wonder if this is a bounce back spot for Baylor, because I would think they've got to come out playing with their hair on fire, especially on defense. So I don't like to tee up a lot of unders, but I think the under could be in play here again. And I don't know. I just wonder if maybe Baylor could be the side to jump on in this one. Phil, what do you see?
What's the total on this one, Tripp?
Total's 47, and we've got Utah -8.5.
Yeah, I definitely like the situation for Baylor this week. Now they're going to be without their quarterback, Blake Shapen, but Sawyer Robinson came in last week, did well. Baylor put up 524 yards offense against Texas State last week. And this is an absolute circle the wagons game for Baylor. They have now lost 5 straight games. They cannot afford to lose 6. And meanwhile, Utah is coming off that high against Florida, but I didn't really think they beat Florida. I mean, Florida beat themselves last week. Florida had a 346, 270-yard edge. I don't know if they're going to have Cam Rising for this one for Utah. And if it's Bryson Barnes, their offense hasn't been very good when it's been Barnes or, even Nate Johnson used as the running threat. You go back to last year's game against Washington State. They only put up 21 points on the road. And this is a Utah team that is unbeatable at home. They had a great situation last week, unbeatable playing with revenge at home. But on the road, they're about a 50-50 team. They win half their games, they lose half their games. So I think you got a Baylor team, circle the wagons at home, must-win situation, getting over a touchdown. At worst case scenario, I think Baylor takes this one within 3 or 5. Best case scenario, Baylor pulls the outright upset. So I like the Bears plus the points.
Phil, let's jump ahead to the middle part of the day. Tulane, still nationally ranked, still winning, still exceeding, I think, many expectations to this point. They were in a tough one early against South Alabama, but they were able to pass the latest test. Could have been a letdown spot looking ahead to Ole Miss and the Rebels from the SEC who are coming down to Ole Miss Stadium this weekend. This particular contest has the folks of New Orleans and Tulane Nation, Wave Nation, certainly fired up, and they have been for some time, having this one circled on the calendar. So Ole Miss is favored by a touchdown and a half. The total is 67. Green Wave are ranked 24th. The Rebels are ranked 20th. One of just, I believe, 2 ranked on ranked games, the other being Texas, Alabama. We'll get to that one later coming up in prime time. But for Tulane, Michael Pratt, just 1 incompletion last week, still super efficient, 294 yards or so, 4 touchdowns. Ole Miss rolled. I mean, they had Mercer. It was not a problem for them. One of 2 teams to score 73 points, Oklahoma being the other. Oregon had scored 81 last weekend, but this isn't one of those lopsided games on paper. This is an exciting one, Phil, that has a lot of people jazzed up, if you will, out in Zydeco country, and I'm certainly one of them. I'm sure you are too. Can Tulane cover the number here at home in a massive spot for the Green Wave?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great game. Tulane, last week, I like South Alabama plus the points over Tulane, and it looked good in the second quarter, and then all of a sudden Tulane just laid it on them and surprised me a little bit. So that's a very good South Alabama team, and they had a 436, 265-yard edge. As you mentioned, Michael Pratt looks even much improved. I'm still waiting to see what's going to happen to running back, though, because last year Tulane was at its best when Tyjae Spears was running the ball. He had 1,561 yards last year. Last week, their top running back had just 41 yards rushing. So a little concern there. But overall, Tulane really impressed me. And Ole Miss, when I talked to their coaching staff after the spring practice was over, they were high on Jackson Dart. So he's going to be vastly improved this year, and he looked vastly improved, granted against Mercer. But you got to like Trey Harris at the receiver spot with 4 touchdowns last week. So this is a very dangerous and explosive Ole Miss offense. I think it's going to be a great game. I see Ole Miss winning this one 7-10. So I personally wouldn't even wager on it because it's tough to go against Tulane. But this is an Ole Miss team that if they get the lead, Lane will put some points on late. I'm just going to stay away from this one.
All right, let's jump to another 3:30 kick in Coral Gables. Number 23, Texas A&M on the road at Miami. A&M is laying 4 right now. That totals at 51. Both these teams rolled in their opener. Last year's meeting, 17-9 in favor of the Aggies. That was in College Station. Both teams looking to be way improved from last season. But this might come down to Miami. Looks like they really want to run the ball this year, and they're going up against a very big Texas A&M front. So how do you see this one playing out here, Phil? I think it's kind of a coin flip game.
Yeah, and everybody asks me every year. They go, "Phil, do you have a favorite team?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I have a favorite team. It's the one I pick higher than everybody else." And both these two teams are on my most improved list this year, so I'm very bullish on both A&M and Miami. And I thought both looked great in the opener. I mean, A&M scored touchdowns on their first 5 possessions against New Mexico, and New Mexico's got an underrated defense. I'm going to say that. So it was a good offensive showing, a vastly improved offense for A&M. I think Bobby Petrino steps into a great situation. Last year, they lost their top wide receiver, Anaya Smith, week 3 or 4, and their receiving core was very young. This year, they've got one of the best receiving cores. They've got dangerous running backs, a much more veteran offensive line. A&M's going to be explosive. But as you mentioned, Miami's also got that big offensive line. When I talked to Coach Cristobal, he was buoyant over the improvements they have at both the offensive and defensive lines. The offensive line's bigger, stronger, faster, and they look good running the football last week. Now, I'll say this on this game, though. A&M's had 5 great recruiting classes under Jimbo Fisher. Mario Cristobal's had 2 great recruiting classes, but doesn't have quite the depth A&M does. If you watch last year's game, this will nowhere near resemble it. Both teams have more offense. You're not going to see the defensive slugfest of last year. But I'm going to side with A&M minus the points just for the fact they've got better overall depth and maybe better prepared for this game.
70th edition of the Cy-Hawk Trophy, Phil, and it's in Ames. Jack Trice Stadium is the scene. Iowa State and Iowa. Hawkeyes had a 6-game win streak in the series snapped a year ago. Last time here in Ames, a couple of seasons ago, it was the first time they were an underdog in the series since 2000. They came back to win 27-17. So looking to win a 6th straight overall in Ames after that 6-game overall win streak was snapped last year. Iowa, though, did not hit the total that was stipulated in offensive coordinator Brian Ferentz' contract here prior to the season. 25 points, fell just a single point short a week ago in a win over Utah State. How poetic is this? So they're working from behind already, at least contractually. Iowa and Iowa State, how does this one shake up in the mind of one Phil Steele as these two rivals get together this weekend? Iowa State looked good at times against Northern Iowa last week.
Yeah, Iowa State led 30-0 and had the yardage edge. Had the game in hand, and then after they led 30-0, that's when Northern Iowa got the majority of their offense and ended up actually outgaining Iowa State, but it was against Iowa State's backup, so don't take too much out of that. With Iowa, I liked Iowa minus the points against Utah State last week, and it didn't work out. They scored touchdowns on their first 2 possessions. It looked like they were going to go flying over the total and winning the game comfortably, and ended up only winning the game by 10. So I was a little disappointed in Iowa's performance last week after a great start. However, when I match up these two teams, Cade McNamara was banged up last week. He'll still be a little banged up this week. He's got a large quarterback edge over Rocco Beck. Both teams have the defenses. This game's actually gone under 16 of the last 18 games that they've faced each other. So I do like the under, and I also definitely like Iowa. I think when you look at Iowa State, they unexpectedly lost their quarterback, unexpectedly lost their top running back. They lost their top receiver. Iowa's got more coming back. Both defenses are strong. A low-scoring game, but I like Iowa to cover and make it 7-1 in the last 8 years in this series.
Disgustingly low number at 36 as the total was 10-7 a year ago when Iowa State won out at Kinnick Stadium. If you want predictions to every single game, make sure you subscribe to Inside the Press Box. More information there at philsteele.com. That's the weekly newsletter with all the predictions and analysis each and every week. So Inside the Press Box, go to philsteele.com. Of course, make sure you're following him on Twitter at philsteele042 and Phil Steele Plus. More information about that, $99 value as well. Interact with us at CSN College Sports Now. One random listener, someone who interacts with us on a weekly basis, will be up for a free $99 value membership there with Phil Steele Plus.
All right, moving on. UTEP on the road, going to Big Ten country. They're taking on Northwestern. And UTEP's favored. Now, Phil, I know you've got all the numbers here and all the stats, but UTEP on the road against a Big Ten team, and they're the favorite. That seems like it would almost be an autoplay to take the Big Ten team, but I don't know if I feel that comfortable with that here. Northwestern has not really inspired me side with them on anything. Am I crazy here?
Yeah, I actually lean with UTEP in this one. I was hoping they'd be an underdog. I would have loved UTEP as an underdog. It's scary to have them a slight favorite in the game. But you go back to last week's Rutgers game against Northwestern. First drive of the game, Rutgers with a big offensive line, 16-play drive. And then Northwestern gets, I think they had 5 plays. And then Rutgers gets the ball back, 16-play drive. They wore them down. If UTEP's got a strength, it's at the line of scrimmage. They have a big veteran offensive line. They've got a running back in Dion Hankins. They call him Tankins at UTEP. And last week they ran for 329 yards. I thought they were unfortunate when they played Jacksonville State in the opener. They had a 364, 275-yard edge, 22-15 first down edge, somehow came up short in that game. I look for UTEP to go on the road and get the win against a Northwestern team where you got to hand it to David Braun. He's trying to get these kids ready to play, but really their season was gutted when they fired Pat Fitzgerald and a couple of key players left over the summer. So I think it's going to be another long season for Northwestern, and I actually like UTEP to get the win on the road.
And Vaughn was one of those guys that had just arrived in Evanston, too, coming over from North Dakota State. And he's inherited quite the mess. And, yeah, uninspiring effort for most of the game at Rutgers a week ago. So UTEP favored in Big Ten country. Next up, this particular game is a candidate for a sick pick. The sickos would love this one because UMass is an underdog against Miami of Ohio. The Minutemen are home, and I don't necessarily agree that they should be the underdog in this situation. This is one of those where I start scratching my head. Really? Do I want to second guess UMass being an underdog? It seems like that's been, a constant for so long. But UMass is, let's see, I think it was 7 the last time I had seen it. Yeah, 44.5 is the total. 3:30 game on ESPN Plus. Check your local cable subscriber or streaming device for that one. But Phil, I like the Minutemen. The way Don Brown has his team playing through 2 weeks in the season. I know they didn't come through for you at Auburn this past week, but still, I think they can file that away appropriately, given their win to begin the year. Give me the Minutemen and the points.
Yeah, and last week, if you watched that UMass Auburn game, when I watch games, Kyle, I look at good plays, bad plays in my head. And, watching the game, it was only maybe 60-40 in favor of Auburn. It wasn't a beatdown. Auburn had a lot of short drives for touchdowns, a couple of returns for touchdowns. I thought UMass moved the ball well. A good portion of the game, they averaged 5.2 yards per carry. I thought that was a much better performance than the final score would indicate. So I'm still bullish on UMass. This is a team that Don Brown told me their goal is to get to a bowl. They got a key win in the opener. Last week, it was a game that maybe was unwinnable. Now they get a winnable game at home. And the thing with Miami of Ohio, and if you follow Chuck Martin, they opened up about a 500 team, a little below 500 his first few years. And then he just put the focus on conference games. Since then, they've done great in MAC play. They've made a couple of MAC title games. They get to bowl games religiously. But in non-conference games, he's actually 4-17 against the spread in non-conference games during the regular season. So add it all up, I do think UMass has a shot at the outright win here. They disappointed me last week, but once again, watching the game, I felt good about the pick of UMass plus the huge points over Auburn because they stood toe-to-toe with Auburn for a good portion of the game. There's a couple of big plays did them in.
And if you're looking for some valuable advice, of course, the Phil Steele magazine is where you need to go. But as your team page reminds all of us, these two were MAC conference foes, divisional foes at that, just a few short years ago, from 2012 to 2015. UMass since then 1-7 straight up against former or current MAC members, teams they used to compete with inside the league. 1-7 and 3-5 against the spread.
All right, 4:00 start time in Greenville, North Carolina. We've got Marshall on the road taking on ECU. Marshall's coming in favored by a field goal. The total's at 43.5. The line opened up with Marshall being favored by 1, so it's moving towards those guys, even though they're coming off a week where they had to come from behind to beat Albany. And it's another, coin flip game here. One thing that I noticed in this game, ECU's been a really good under team, especially first quarter, first half. So we talk about blackjack a lot, playing the streak. That might be the play for me here on this one. What do you like, Phil?
What's the total, Trip?
43.5.
Yeah, I would probably lean with the under. You look at East Carolina last week. Now, granted, they were playing Michigan's defense, But Mason Garcia and Alex Flynn both saw action at quarterback and were sort of underwhelming. But once again, that was Michigan's defense. Marshall does have a good defense. And as you pointed out, Marshall was very underwhelming last week against Albany. So it's a game where you've got a Marshall team that seems to play better on the road. They're actually 9-3 against the spread on the road the last couple of years. Cam Fancher was okay last week, not as good as I expected. As you mentioned, they needed a comeback to beat Albany by 1. I do think Rashawn Ali gives him a little edge at the running back spot. He had 137 yards last week. My original line on this game was Marshall -3, and the line's -3. So I got nothing on this one. I think it's going to be a good game to watch.
Stay away. He's disciplined. Listen to Phil. Follow him on X at Phil Steele 042. Get all of those takes. There's a lot of takes flying around the state of North Carolina this week, especially after the way North Carolina played against South Carolina. Drake May wasn't his best, showed flashes, but he didn't have to be. That defense was menacing. 9 sacks of Spencer Rattler and company. That Gamecocks offense just completely neutered. North Carolina didn't have more than 3 sacks in a single game all last season. They had 9 in one game. They had tackles behind the line of scrimmage, I think, more than a quarter of the time or near that. I mean, it was super impressive. Now they're ranked 17th. They're at home. They're getting Appalachian State. The people on the mountain there, many of them also claim North Carolina fandom. We work with many of them, but most of the App State football fans are putting that to the side to get out the Carolina Blue this week. So most of them are up home for the Tar Heels. But an interesting spot because I'm desperate, Phil, for a reason to pick Appalachian State to cover what is almost 19 points, 18.5. Tar Heels are favored by 58.5 total, 5:15 awkward start time, ACC Network. I don't know anybody on App State's team, though. Quarterback is unrecognizable. He's a former JUCO guy. I got nothing. I think Carolina stops the Mountaineers this Saturday.
I sort of lean with App State plus the points. I know North Carolina looked great last week. The blowout of South Carolina in the second half. But when I look at North Carolina, as you mentioned, 9 sacks as a 17 all of last year. You love the defense. And for the last 3 years, I've talked to Mac Brown, and he has said, Phil, we look pretty on that defensive line, but we just got to play that way. Well, they're playing that way now, so that makes them dangerous. The thing about App is they're going to try to shrink the game. They're going to be running the football a little bit more. I think last week they played around with the pass attack at 24, but you're going to see them use the quarterback run. I think Joey Aguirre only ran the ball 3 times last week. I look for him to run more. They're going to try to shrink the clock, and I think that might keep them under the number in this one. So I'm leaning a little bit with App State, but it's scary because North Carolina's got the offense and the defense. It sure looked good last week.
How about the last 2 times these two teams played, too, Tripp? You remember those? The over, at least last year, 63-61. Carolina won at App. And it went over the previous meeting, too, as well. I mean, these two teams can combine for a lot of points. Total here is 58.5.
All right, let's move on to the evening session. 6 o'clock start time in Norman, Oklahoma. The Sooners at home taking on SMU. Both teams looked great last week. I think the big, question for Oklahoma coming into the season is what is the defense going to look like with Brent Venables in year 2? I don't think they got what they expected last season, so looking for a big improvement this year. And they gave up nothing last week, but they're going to face an SMU team that's a lot better equipped to score some points on them. Now, this is one game where I think, even though it's pretty high, 68.5, I think the over's still in play here. What do you like between the Ponies and the Sooners?
Yeah, you got to think it's going to be on the higher scoring side, especially the Stone Age era has begun at SMU with Preston Stone at the quarterback spot. Looked good last week. They jumped out to that huge halftime lead against Louisiana Tech, and they got L.J. Johnson, ran for over 100 yards. You look at Oklahoma, just dominant. And that might have been a game where, they got the early touchdown, then they got the return touchdown. They had another touchdown. It's 21-0, 7 minutes into the game. Maybe Arkansas State started thinking, you know what, we better preserve ourselves for the rest of the season, and sort of mailed in the rest of the game. But Oklahoma is dominant, start to finish. So I actually lean with Oklahoma at home. They are my number 2 most improved team in the country this year. So I'm bullish on Oklahoma in that respect. And they figure to be favored in 11 of their 12 games. So despite coming off a losing season last year, this is a team that could easily be right there with Texas contending for the Big 12 title spot. I had Oklahoma winning by something like 17-21, so a slight lean with Oklahoma in this one. And you do have to think points would be on the board.
Phil, tell me about the battle for the Paddle Wheel Trophy, happening for the first time since 2012. Former Big East rivals hadn't played since then. It's going to be Pittsburgh, who is hosting Cincinnati. The Panthers are favored by 7.5, 45.5 is the total. So the game on CW. Welcome to sports television rights CW. It started with the Live Golf Tour. Now they found their way into the ACC, who's one of the first to cross over that line here in the offseason. 7.5, again, the Panthers are favored by. This would go a long way, Phil, with my early season prediction, preseason prediction of Pitt going over that season win total predicted at 6.5.
Yeah, and I love over 6.5 for Pitt this year. That looks like a no-brainer, and it should be a very comfortable winner for you. You know, last week, Cincinnati, Emory Jones looked good. 19 of 23, 345 yards. He's a guy that has some starting experience, but Pitt's just the better team. This is a Pitt defense that just reloads each and every year. They were dominant against Wofford. In fact, if you watch the Wofford game, the one touchdown, I mean, it was offensive pass interference. It was like a Hail Mary 70-yard touchdown at the end of the game. Other than that, they had 56 yards against Pitt's defense. And the biggest difference may be a quarterback for Pitt. Keaton Slovis was unimpressive last year. Phil Jurkovec, I think, in the offense with his offensive coordinator that he had at Boston College 2 years ago, is going to have a big year. They had three running backs that all look good. And Coach Narduzzi told me he felt any of the three running backs could top 1,000 yards this year. So they've got the offensive line. They've got the defense. They're at home. Cincinnati's in the first year for Satterfield. I think they go through a rebuilding year this year. The spread's cheap because of the scores last week. I like Pitt minus the points in this one.
Unmute yourself, Tripp. That's 2 weeks in a row. Wow. Come on, Lock Doctor. What are we doing?
What am I doing? I can't believe I did that. Twice in a row.
Here's how you do it.
You got me.
You don't mute yourself when you take a sip. Just pull your mic away. How about that?
Yeah, I could do that, but I mean, a bottle squish around. Anyways, all right, the game everybody's talking about. Number 11, Texas, on the road in Tuscaloosa, taking on number 3, Alabama. 7:00 kick on ESPN. We hear the line every time somebody brings up the game. Nick Saban 28-2 against former assistants. But look, the quarterback for Bama last week, Milroe, I thought he looked pretty good. Ran for a couple scores, threw for 3. Quinn Ewers on the other side threw for 3 of his own in a win over Rice last week. Look, the Longhorns might get 4 quarters this time around out of Quinn Ewers. You know, he had to exit early after getting injured in last season's meeting, but no Bijan Robinson this time around. What do you think about the Longhorns' chances to keep it close in Tuscaloosa on Saturday night?
Well, I think Texas is a heck of a team. In fact, if you look at my power ratings in the magazine where I rank the positions in the Big 12, they're rated number 1 or tied for number 1 at all 8 position categories in the Big 12. Texas is a heck of a team. Last year, Alabama's a 21-point road favorite. I love Texas in that game. Should have won the game, and had Ewers not got injured, they would have won it. But there's a difference between being a 21-point away favorite against a team super juiced up at home, and maybe you're not playing your A game, versus an Alabama team that got a lot of disrespect in the offseason. I mean, the last time they came in preseason number 4, they ran the table, won the national title, and their question mark, the one big question mark you had with Alabama was quarterback. Jalen Milroe looked great last week against Middle Tennessee, running the football as well as throwing it with the 3 touchdown passes. Now, Alabama, if you follow them the last couple of years, they've struggled mightily on the road. You look at that Texas game. You look at the Tennessee game, which they lost last year, the LSU game, which they lost, the Ole Miss game, which they barely got by. 2 years ago, they almost lost in the swamp to Florida, barely got past Auburn on the road. They lost at Texas A&M, but at home, they're a different animal. They're 13-5 against the spread as a home favorite. They do great non-conference games against Power 5 teams. The Alabama crowd, which usually comes to games and figures, you know what, this is nice, and we're going to beat this team by 42 points. They're going to be fired up for this game. So you're going to have one of the best Alabama home crowds, an Alabama team that plays its best ball at home. Circle the wagons. I like the Tide to win this one by double digits.
I agree with you, Phil. I think Alabama is going to take Texas out back behind Bryant Denny and do dirty things to them. So Steve Sarkisian is returning as well to T-Town. Nick Saban, across all his stops as a head coach, just spectacular in so many ways. We know this. I'm not breaking news, but the numbers to back it up. 104-20 career record against non-conference opponents in the regular season, and the postseason. So he's been tremendous. And I think Alabama, as tight as that game was a year ago, they're out for revenge. Winning by a point, they're going to make it certainly count this time around. So that is the game of the weekend. I think most of us can all agree it is going to be on the Varsity Network as part of our college football Saturday night package with Chris Hassel on play-by-play from CBS Sports and then Mike Golick Jr., Gojo from the DraftKings podcast network. Of course, you know him from ESPN, his days of playing football in Notre Dame, and his papa, Mike Golick, as well. So Golick Jr. and Hassel have the call of that one, 7 o'clock on the Varsity Network app. Make sure you download that. You can have access to all of the hometown radio calls as well. That's 7 o'clock, Texas at Alabama. 13th ranked Oregon, 6.5-point favorite. 69 is the total, playing at Texas Tech, 7 o'clock on Fox. Phil, we're all over Texas Tech not being able to lay the points. Wyoming not only covered, but they won outright in overtime. Just a fantastic game at altitude in Laramie. Now Texas Tech and Joey McGuire return home to Lubbock. Is that going to be the recipe needed for them to cover against the Ducks, 13th ranked team who put up 81 against Portland State last week?
Yeah, Tech's a much different team at home than they are on the road. So that's one big factor going in their favor. I also like teams off a loss generally against a team off a big win. But even with that said, I'm leaning with the Ducks minus the points in this one. And when the Texas Tech game last week against Wyoming didn't get off to a great start for us. I mean, Wyoming fumbled the first two drives, benched their number 3 and number 4 running backs. Are down to their number 5 running back, trailing 17-0. But after that, Wyoming pretty much controlled the game. I was impressed with the way they played. And Texas Tech is a team where my power ratings had them all over the place. They had them anywhere from 4-8 to 11-1. 2 of my sets actually had them 11-1. So I don't know what to think of Tech. It's a veteran team. They're at home. But the one thing I do like about Oregon is they are much more experienced than they were last year. It's the second year for Dan Lanning as the head coach. And last year, at the end of the year, their quarterback, Bo Nix, was banged up. You look at that Utah game, the Oregon State game, he was hobbling around not 100%. Bo Nix is 100% for this game. He'll utilize his legs in this one. And I just think Oregon's a better team and gets the road win. And if the line's under a touchdown, I'll take Oregon by a touchdown or more.
All right. I've heard a lot of people that are on Georgia State this week. UConn's on the road at Georgia State. Georgia State favored by 3, the total at 54.5, 7 o'clock kick time. Look, UConn had their chances against NC State. That was, I think people have undersold. That was a good win for NC State. I mean, UConn was up for that game. NC State could have taken them lightly. That was a really good win for NC State. So I don't think it was anything embarrassing for UConn in their opener. Georgia State, they're 1-0, but they gave up 35 to Rhode Island, over 400 through the air. What's your lean between UConn and Georgia State this weekend?
Yeah, I like UConn plus the points to pull the upset. My computer actually has UConn by 3 in this one. So it's pretty interesting. You know, last year, UConn struggled. They didn't really have a quarterback that can throw the ball. Joe Fagnano is at the quarterback spot last week, looked decent, playing a very good NC State team. Victor Rosa had that big touchdown run and then somersault in the end zone, which basically cost him 7 points because a 15-yard penalty, and then NC State came down and got the touchdown after the personal foul and the kickoff. Had a very short drive for that score. But I was impressed with what I saw from UConn. And this is a team that Jim Moore has built and built strong. And as you mentioned, Georgia State gave up 520 yards to Rhode Island last week in a 7-point win, but that just doesn't pass it for me. So I think UConn can go on the road and get the win. Remember, they benefited from bowl practices, something Georgia State didn't have last year. I like Connecticut plus the points.
Good call, Phil. I'm on board with the Huskies there. 2 teams that gave us quite the entertaining game early in the season. I think it was the opener a couple of years ago in 2021, where UCF was the host to Boise State. Now the Knights are going to return the favor as they're traveling 2,600 plus miles, their longest trip out west since visiting Stanford back in 2015, as the PHIL Steele magazine college football preview indicates. It's going to be a contest that sees the Knights favored by 3.5. 61 is the total. 7 o'clock on FS1. Liked what I saw from John Rice Plumlee a week ago. 371 all-purpose yards, 4 total TDs. There were some bad decisions, though. A few turnovers in there. Also, now they're going to be on the road against a Boise State team that jumped out to an early lead against Washington before Michael Penix Jr. and the boys straight ran the Broncos into the ground in Seattle. How does this one shake out for you? What's your lean on the Knights and the Broncos, 7 o'clock, Fox Sports 1?
Well, of the 4 teams that joined the Big 12 this year, I said UCF was by far the best of them. They looked great last week. But keep in mind, Kent State only has 4 returning starters, all on defense. They had 0 returning starters on offense. So you expected a blowout last week, and it happened. Now they got to go all the way across the country, play on the blue turf. And Boise has got to be one of those circle the wagon games. They're at home. They absolutely have to win here. They've won something like 21 straight home openers over the last 21 years. It's really a remarkable record. They've got the running backs with Helani and Gente. I think Talon Green, who was unimpressive last week, he had 20 incompletions. I think he'll have a better game this week at home on the blue turf. And they're not playing as potent a team as a Washington on the road in Husky Stadium. They're at home on the blue turf. I side with Boise plus the points in this one and a potential upset.
Yeah, Washington didn't make our dock this week, but they really did look good last weekend in that opener. Michael Penix throws one heck of a deep ball, too. Just a very, very pretty pass. Let's move on to UCLA on the road at San Diego State, 7:30, or I'm sorry, I think I got there. Yeah, 7:30 kick time. Chip Kelly had 2 quarterbacks last week. Don't think he's quite made up his mind yet because he says he's going to play 3 this week. Dante Moore, the freshman, big expectations for him, and he did show that some flashes that he could be what everybody wants him to be. But the Bruins let Coastal hang around for quite a bit in that game last week, a little bit more than they were comfortable with. I think San Diego State looks like they really want to run the ball. UCLA's defense did look pretty good. I think the under's in play here again. I just checked last night. It was 49.5. We're down to 48.5 now. I still think it's a decent number. But what do you like here on this between San Diego State and UCLA?
Yeah, I like San Diego State plus the points in this one. When you look at UCLA, the game against Coastal was at home last week. It is 14-13, and Coastal's kicking a 55-yard field goal to take the lead. They miss it. On the next play, Dante Moore hits a 65-yard touchdown pass. They add on a touchdown drive and win it 27-13. But I thought that the 2 teams played fairly even. When you look at San Diego State, now I've been nonplussed with San Diego State so far this year. You go back to the opener against Ohio. Ohio lost their quarterback, Rourke, in the first quarter of the game. They were able to win that 120-13. And then last week against Idaho State, maybe looking ahead to UCLA. They didn't play their A game by any stretch of the imagination, only winning that game by 8. They did give up a late touchdown. I think Jalen Madden, who has struggled so far this year, he's only hit 63% with a 2-0 ratio. I think he'll have a better game. I like San Diego State plus the points. I see UCLA winning. I had the game in single digits, and you're getting over 2 touchdowns with San Diego State. So I clearly like the Aztecs at home plus the points.
Phil, tell me about Arizona making their first ever trip to Mississippi State. These 2 played last year, and it was a beatdown by the Bulldogs on the Wildcats in the desert, 39-17. That was a Mike Leach-led Mississippi State team. It's Zach Arnett's first full year now after the tragic passing of Leach in the offseason, taking on a third-year head coach in Jed Fish, who has Arizona much improved, coming off a win over Northern Arizona, 2 1-0 teams. And the number here between these two, 9.5. So Mississippi State favored in Stark Vegas, 16.5 is the total, 7:30 on SEC Network. What's your lead here, Phil? Arizona notoriously not good against current SEC teams. 1-5-1 straight up, 3-4 ATS. First road trip against the SEC was against LSU, 8th-ranked Tigers in 2006, national championship winning year for the Tigers when they lost 45-3.
Yeah, and in this one, I like Mississippi State. My computer loves Mississippi State in this one. It's got the Bulldogs winning at 42-25. And I'll say this about Mississippi State. In the magazine, I picked them 7th in the West. Now, that doesn't mean I was picking them there because of the talent. I picked them there because of the schedule. They get Alabama at home. They'll be an underdog. They get LSU at home. They'll be an underdog. They have to play at South Carolina, at Arkansas, at Auburn, at Texas A&M. They're probably going to be an underdog in 6 SEC games this year. And the Ole Miss game at the end of the year is probably a toss-up. That's why I picked them 7th. It wasn't because of the talent. And last week, they really impressed me. They said they're going to come out and run the football. And they did. They ran for close to 300 yards, but they still threw for over 200. They've got Will Rogers at QB. They've got a dangerous defense. And last year, I thought they pretty much controlled the game. If you watch it, I thought Mississippi State blew 2 or 3 opportunities at having an even bigger margin than 39-17 last year. Arizona, I like a lot, Jaden DeLora, but I just think this is one where the more physical team that's now running the football wears them down. And I like Mississippi State to win this one by double digits.
By the way, set your TV tuner, your cable tuner, your DVR. Maryland-Charlotte is the NBC game of the week with the Big Ten affiliation now. That's a 7:30 start. The Terps favored by 24.5 at home. 51.5 is the total. Noah Eagle and Todd Blackledge can tell you more about that one at 7:30. We're intentionally passing on this one, Phil, just for the sake of time. So, Tripp, we need to go chase. Take us home.
Yeah, a little late night chase for you here. Oklahoma State -3 on the road at Arizona State, 10:30 kick in Tempe. I mean, Oklahoma State, they kind of took their time last week. Another team that took a while to pull away from Central Arkansas, a lot longer than they were comfortable with. So they're on the road taking on the Sun Devils. Who do you like here, Phil?
You know, I would absolutely love Oklahoma State if they were settled at quarterback. After spring, it looked like Alan Bowman was the clear-cut starter, but then Gundy comes in at the end of the game and gets 2 touchdowns. They used all 3 quarterbacks last week, and there's a question mark who's going to start. And as you mentioned, they weren't that impressive against Central Arkansas, but Arizona State wasn't that impressive against Southern Utah either. I mean, the game, granted, there was bad weather, which probably slowed down both teams, but they only came out with a 3-point win in the game they led. I like their quarterback in Jaden Rashada, the true freshman. I think he could be poised for a decent season this year. But Oklahoma State's clearly a better team, the more experienced head coach. They win their non-conference games. I like Oklahoma State to go on the road and look much better than they did last week and get the victory here.
Phil, what about Cal and Auburn? This game is in Berkeley. Each of these teams coming in with a 1-0 record. My goodness. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, it's Hugh Freeze going out west. 10:30 ESPN, 6.5. Tigers are favored by 54.5 is the total. I don't know how you begin to size up this one. It's the first meeting on the gridiron between these two all time. Auburn and Cal. Get your popcorn ready.
Well, last week I mentioned that Justin Wilcox is a very poor favorite, but a great dog. And then as a favorite last week, they go and steamroll North Texas. When in the hell is the last time California had 660 some odd yards of offense?
Yeah.
And that was losing Sam Jackson early. Ben Finley, who, if you go back and watch his game last year he had against North Carolina, I thought he played extremely well. And look what he did here. 71% completions. They got Jaden out at running back. The defense still looked like a Wilcox defense. And Cal's just an automatic play as a dog. Away dog, home dog. They cover the spread. It's a long trip for Auburn. And as I mentioned, watching that Auburn-UMass game last week, it was only 60-40, good plays, bad plays for Auburn. They had some big plays go in their favor, but I don't think they really dominated the game against Massachusetts like the number would indicate with the 45-point win. So add it all up, I like the home dog here, Cal plus the 6.5 or 7 points at home to potentially even pull the upset.
Tigers are 0-3 all-time in games played in the state of California. Santa Clara, 1936, number 18 USC at the Coliseum at 0-2. And then Tripp against your boys, number 1 Florida State in the 2014 BCS championship game, which was played in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. They're 10-3 overall, 0-2 on the road against current members of the Pac-12. So good vibes there. I love Oregon. Speaking of Oregon, I love Oregon myself is one of my favorite plays of this week, Phil. So your 3 power plays would be as follows. Who are your favorites this week? I'm taking Oregon laying the 6.5 at Texas Tech.
Makes sense. 2 of the games we talked about, Oklahoma State minus the 3 against Arizona State, and Alabama minus the 7 against Texas. And then one that we didn't talk about, it's Wisconsin. When I talked to Coach Fickle, he had said that what they're going to do is spreading out the defenses. They're not going to face as many players in the box. They're going to run the ball more effectively, and we saw that in the opener against Buffalo. They ran for 7.9 yards per carry. So Wisconsin team is my number 1 surprise team in the magazine. I think they're capable of contending for a playoff spot. And last year they lost to Washington State. And what I like about that is that they had a 22-10 first down edge in the game, but somehow lost it. Yeah, Washington State's going to be pumped up at home. It's going to be a loud crowd, but I like Wisconsin to go on the road and get the win there. So the three of them this week are Oklahoma State, Wisconsin, and Alabama.
That's a 7:30 game on ABC. 19th ranked Wisconsin laying the 6 at Washington State, Alabama the 7, and Oklahoma State the 3. Tripp, we've retired sort of the teaser model. Have we not? I mean, is there anything that is tickling your fancy here entering week 3?
We don't have to. There's, we can throw a teaser in here and there. Last year, the first half of last season, it was a little shaky.
Let's do it, Tripp.
It got better as we went along. Well, I'll tell you one team that may make it into a teaser of mine this week, but I like them with the points. Southern Miss against Florida State, going against my guys. I like Southern Miss with the points. So if we're going to do a little Schass versus Tripp thing here, that would be my pick this week. I think that just a good situational play with Southern Miss getting, I think it's up to 31.5 now on my site. So I think that's a lot of points for Florida State to cover. And they're coming off such a big win over LSU. And, they've got to be feeling really good about themselves. Just a good letdown spot here.
Yeah, short week too, Tripp.
Short week. That's right. Yeah.
Playing Sunday and coming off a huge win. Love the situational advantage for Southern Miss this week.
Before we hit record on this podcast, I had to go load Golden Eagle Hotline with Will Hall and the voice of the Golden Eagles, 40-plus years, John Cox. So that coaches show I know will be rocking from walk-ons in Hattiesburg tonight in preparation of their trip. Leaving tomorrow to go to Tallahassee. Yeah, I like that. Interesting pick, Tripp. Going against your guys. But, hey, call a spade a spade. And it takes money to make money, right? Bet smarter, not harder, and Phil Steele will certainly help you with that. The sick pick, I mentioned, I want to give something sick, something nasty for all the sickos out there. Give me UMass as a dog at home, taking down UMass. So lay the points, take them outright. Give me the Minutemen to cover what is the full touchdown now at home against Miami. That's 3:30 on ESPN+. Just take them on the money line. Right there. Phil, anything else we can promote for you this weekend, head into week 3? I know you had all the TVs fired up this past weekend, 87 total games. We had a smattering of them on Thursday and Friday, just a few, and mostly FCS games, which I know Inside the Press Box can help out with those game-by-game analysis and predictions each week.
Yeah, Inside the Press Box gives you analysis on every single game, all 80-some-odd games that are played this week, FBS versus FCS. Go to philsteele.com and get that FCS magazine, 2 full pages on every FCS team, and it gives you complete coverage, spread records the last 5 years, and they're putting up the numbers on the FCS game more readily this week, which is really good. So philsteele.com for that. And then every Friday morning, I give you the Phil Steele Plus Tour with selections. Make sure you check that out for a lot of interesting things.
I love it, Phil. It's been real. Tripp, follow him on X, at Tripp Hurd, at PhilSteele042. I'm back. Kyle Schass will be back for what will be week 3 next week. Again, bet smarter, not harder with Phil Steele right here on College Sports Now.